We've arrived at the second half of Genesis chapter 18, and it deals with two concepts which are absolutely critical to the life of the Christian. They really speak into the modern life of how a Christian lives in the world, which is altogether important for every single person who calls Jesus Christ their Lord and Saviour. And the two ideas we're going to focus on that Genesis 18 here really wants to speak to is the concept right at the beginning that to be called by God equals a responsibility. And we'll see this very clearly in some of the discussions that the Lord has with Abraham. In other words, when God calls you to be one of his people, it inherently is a call to be just like God, to be a person who uses wisdom, to imparts morality into their life in order to teach themselves and others. And so we're going to look at that. To be called by God involves the responsibility to act in a certain way. The second concept that God is teaching Abraham about is the concept that occurs right at the second half of the text from verses 24 and 25 through to the end, and that is God inherently more loving of the righteous than he is to punish the wicked? It's an important concept because it'll dictate how we view other people, how we view members of our family who aren't Christians. Let me just repeat that because you'll see it again when we come into our text. Is God wanting to punish the wicked more than love the righteous? Think about that for a moment and maybe dwell on that for yourself. Are you interested in the evil of people being punished more than loving people? Let us come to our text today. We're going to begin way back in verse 16 of our passage in Genesis 18. Let me read that, and we're going to focus on bits as we go through. So, verse 16 of Genesis 18. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" Now, this rhetorical question in verse 17 is set up by the Lord in order to help us understand that the calling of Abraham to be a blessing to the world, a righteous man, a nation of believers that will come from his family line, has inherently within it a call of responsibility, a call of knowledge. In other words, when God called Abraham to be a particular type of man, a particular type of family man, a leader of the nation, a leader who will bless the world through him, it inherently has within it a call of responsibility, a type of person that Abraham is now called to be. And it won't be the type of person, sadly, who did what he did before, lied about Sarah being his relative way back in the time he went to Egypt. In this life of Abraham, he's supposed to be a man who exhibits the character of the living God, to make wise decisions. And that'll be so true for us. And so this question, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, is going to be answered in the negative. Of course not. I would never dream of doing that because I want Abraham to learn from me in order to impart my wisdom, my knowledge, my character into the world. And this becomes true for the Christian. But the Christian gets their answer through Jesus Christ. That through Christ we get a knowledge of how he wants to love the world, how he wants to punish evil, how he wants us to live in his world. And so it's our knowledge of what Christ has done, what Christ has said, becomes our way of living in this world. This is demonstrated through the second half here. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. How are they going to be blessed? Through the character of the living God given to them by the people who live out that character, because they've received it from God. They understand it, they've grasped it, they've wrestled with it in their mind, they've stuffed it up, they've repented, they've come back to the Lord. This is the life of Abraham and the life of a Christian. For I've chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. And so here we go now into a deliberate strategy of God teaching Abraham what he wants him to do and know. In other words, Abraham, you've seen the way now that these people are going to behave. This is what I'm thinking, Abraham. Is this what you think? And he does this by a deliberate ploy that we saw, that we'll see with Moses as well. A teaching tool directed to the leader in order to get them to think about the righteousness of God. And it continues on. So the men turned and they left Abram, and before the Lord, this is what happened in verse 24. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? So Abram hears the cry and says, okay, well, the city is obviously a ruinous city, a wicked city. I know that because my relative Lot and his family live there. But not everybody, God, in the city is completely terrible. What if there are 50? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing. In other words, because you are God, surely you would love the righteous rather than punishing the wicked. So when you're weighing these two things up, God, surely your character is on the side of loving righteousness because you're a righteous God. You punish wickedness because they're not righteous. Inside of your character is a God of righteousness. And this continues on for the entire chapter until the very end. And the question ends up being, would you punish the 10 righteous? And it's left there, and the answer comes out in chapter 19. But inherent to our context is, does God love the righteous more than punishing the wicked? And of course, it is a false question. But the character that is at stake is God's character about redeeming people? And the answer is absolutely it is. But the question about the wickedness still is there. And we know from later on in the Psalms and from Romans chapter 3 that God says there is no one righteous, not even one. In other words, all of us are like the people living in Sodom who need to be rescued. Irrespective of how wicked we think we are, our wickedness has definitely gone up to the Lord as an outcry to him because of our rejection of him. And we deserve the same punishment as all of those in Sodom. And the cry of Abraham is a cry that he himself would have needed to see is something that could have came into his own life. He is not righteous. I am not righteous. You are not righteous. We need the righteous one, as 1 Peter would say, to die for the unrighteous. That is me. In other words, the cry of Abraham becomes a cry of all humanity. And God's answer is displayed through Jesus Christ. Namely, that God did not want to punish all the unrighteous, because if he did, no one would survive. He needed to send someone who was absolutely righteous, the righteous one, in order to give us a man to look to, a God to look to, who would save us. And so our Redeemer will not be me. Our Redeemer cannot be ourselves. Our Redeemer needs to be someone who is absolutely righteous and therefore does not need redeeming. His name is Jesus Christ. And only he redeems those who see themselves as unrighteous, who look to God and say, I'm unworthy. And God says, I make you worthy because I'm your creator. I love to redeem unrighteous people and make them righteous. And he does that through Jesus Christ.